The morning the four men rode up to Declan Brannigan's porch, he knew before any of them opened their mouths that something was wrong. He saw it in the way they sat their horses. Stiff, careful, not like neighbors. Like men who had already made up their minds. Declan stepped out of his cabin door, wiping the last of breakfast off his hands. He was 25 years old, lean as a fence rail, with a head of dark red hair he kept too long, and a temper he kept too short. 6 months he'd been on this land, 6 months of breaking his back to build a place he could call his own, and now 4 men were looking at him like he was already guilty of something. "Mornin', boys," he said, "easy. Coffee's still warm." Nobody moved. Old Silas Holbrook was the first to speak. Gray-haired, soft-voiced. "We ain't here for coffee, Declan." "No?" "No." Declan looked at each of them. Silas with his tired eyes. Boone Tatum, blocky and blunt. Mose Whitaker usually grinning. Not grinning now. And Rafe Calder, hawk-faced. Watching Declan the way a coyote watches a rabbit, then say what you came to say. Rafe leaned forward. "Somebody in this valley has been feeding the black horse rustlers. 3 drives in 6 months. 3 times they've hit us at the exact spot, the exact hour, where they shouldn't have known. Half our beef is gone, Brannigan. And you figure it's me. We figure it's somebody who came here 6 months ago. Somebody with hardly any cows of his own to lose. Somebody whose land sits right on the Rustler's road to the Badlands." Declan felt the heat climb up his neck. "Silas, you believe this?" The old man wouldn't meet his eyes. "I don't know what to believe anymore. We've got another drive in 2 weeks. If we get hit again, we're finished. So we got to know." Rafe Calder smiled. "It wasn't kind. We want you to ride up to the sinkhole. Bring old Crockett Vance back. He's been 1 foot in the grave for years. If we lean on him, he'll talk. And if he doesn't, then we'll know it's somebody else." Declan understood then. He understood exactly. They were sending him to fetch the old man, not because they thought Crockett was guilty. They were sending him because they thought he was. And whoever was really pulling the rustler's strings, sitting on a horse in his yard right now, would make sure he never came back. He was the bait. "All right," Declan said. "I'll go." He saddled his big black gelding and slid his Winchester into the scabbard. He buckled on a second gun belt. Something in the way Rafe had watched him told him today was not a day to ride light. The sinkhole lay 7 miles north, past Hogback Ridge, in country so broken, nothing much grew there but resentment. Old Crockett Vance had been scratching out a living on that hardscrabble patch for over 20 years. Declan had never met him, only heard the stories, a bitter old hermit. A cabin so weathered the wind had been chewing on it. As his horse climbed the long slope, Declan let his thoughts run. Somebody in that yard this morning had wanted him dead. He was certain now. The way Rafe Calder had smiled, the way the question had been set up so neatly. If Declan brought Crockett back peaceful, he wasn't worth killing. If he never came back, that would be its own kind of answer. He had crossed bad country and worse luck to reach Silito Valley. 6 months ago, he'd ridden over this ridge and looked down at the green and gold of it and thought, here is where I stop running. Now 4 men had decided he was a thief. His hands tightened on the reins until the leather creaked. The cabin looked exactly as bad as he'd been told. Tilted chimney, leaning barn, sheer cliff walls rose up behind the place, hemming the whole hollow in like a fist. Old Crockett Vance was sitting on the cabin step, and he stood up when Declan rode in. He was a long, bearded scarecrow of a man. Most of his face was buried in white whiskers. His hand drifted, casual as a snake, to the old revolver on his hip. Light down, it wasn't a welcome. It was an order. Declan swung out of the saddle slowly, both hands in plain sight. "Mr. Vance, my name's Brannigan. I've got a place down the valley, the Shamrock. I know who you are. Then you know I'm a neighbor. I know you're a man on my land. Declan kept his voice easy. The other ranchers want to sit down. There's been trouble with rustlers. They thought maybe. Get on your horse. Then Declan caught it, the thing that changed everything. Old Crockett's eyes weren't on him. They kept flicking, just for half a second at a time, up to the rimrock above the cabin. Watching. Listening. The old man wasn't just suspicious of Declan. The old man was afraid. Declan let his own eyes climb the cliff wall. Nothing moved, but the feeling pressed down on him anyway. Eyes, somewhere up there. Eyes. Mr. Vance, he said quietly. Who's up on that ridge? The old man's face went the color of dirty paper, and the cabin door swung open. She came out of the doorway like a storm, tall, nearly his height, slim as a willow whip. Black hair blew black like a raven's wing, fell loose past her shoulders. Her skin was tanned dark gold. And her eyes, God help him, her eyes were the deepest, fiercest blue he had ever seen in a human face. She was carrying a Sharps rifle. She was pointing it at his chest. Get back on your horse, she said. Low, steady, or I'll put a hole through you so big the sun'll shine through. Declan raised both his hands. Easy, miss. I don't take easy from any man. She stepped down off the porch, the rifle never wavering. I heard every word you said to my grandfather, lean through your teeth. You think we don't know who the real rustler in this valley is? Miss, listen to me. I'm counting to 3. 1. There's somebody on the rimrock, Declan said. She stopped for one heartbeat. Just one, her eyes flicked upward, and Declan moved. He came in low and fast inside the swing of the long rifle barrel and got his hand around the stock just as it went off. The Sharps roared. The slug tore a furrow through the dirt where his foot had been. She was on him then like a wildcat. Nails raked his face. A small, hard fist caught him under the ear and lit a white star behind his eyes. He got an arm around her waist, trying not to hurt her, and her grandfather, frozen on the step a heartbeat before, came alive and grabbed at Declan by the ankles. The 3 of them went down in a tangle. Somewhere in the middle of being bitten, kicked, and cursed at in 2 languages, Declan caught her wrist hard enough to make her drop the rifle. He pinned her under his weight and shouted into her face, the only thing he could think of. There's a man with a rifle on that ridge, and he came here to kill your grandfather. She went still. He could feel her heart pounding against his chest. He could see, this close, that her eyelashes were long and black, and that there was a streak of dust across her cheek. Now, he said, quieter, if you'll let me up, and if your grandfather will stop trying to break my legs, I'll prove it. Her name was Catalina Ortega Vance. Her grandfather called her Cat. She didn't trust Declan. She made that very clear. But she listened, in the dim kitchen, while Declan laid out the whole thing. The 4 neighbors, the rustlings. The way the meeting that morning had felt less like a counsel and more like a sentence. They sent me here, he finished, because they think I'm in on it. They figured if I was the traitor, you'd never come back with me. And if I wasn't, well, then somebody in that yard wanted me to ride straight into a bullet. Old Crockett rubbed his beard with a shaking hand. Why us? Why me? Because you're the easiest man in the valley to point a finger at. Alone. Poor. Old. Nobody'd argue much if you turned up dead and a few stolen cows turned up in your corral. Cat said something sharp under her breath. Declan didn't catch the words. He caught the meaning. He looked at her. Really looked. Her hair had come loose in the fight. There was a high color in her cheeks. She was glaring at him like she still wanted to shoot him, but she was listening. Catalina, he said, I am not your enemy. I'm a man who got run out of his own yard this morning by people who used to call themselves my friends. And if we don't move fast, Neither one of us is going to see sundown." She stared at him a long moment. Then she picked up the sharps, broke it open, slid a fresh cartridge into the breech, and snapped it shut. "All right, but Mr. Brannigan, if you're lying, I will still shoot you. Mom, I would expect nothing less." His idea was simple, and it was ugly, and it was the only one he had. If the gunmen on the rimrock were waiting for old Crockett to ride out, they would get what they were waiting for. Sort of. In the back lean-to of the cabin, Declan stripped off his coat and shirt and traded them for Crockett's faded, patched garments. He pulled the old man's slouch hat low over his face. He had Crockett cut a long hank of his white beard and pin it inside the hat band, so that from a distance it looked like the old man's whiskers were still spilling down his chest. Crockett, for his part, put on Declan's clothes. He looked, from a distance, like a young red-haired Irishman. Kat watched them do this with her arms folded and her mouth tight. "You're going to ride out wearing his clothes," she said. "So whoever's up there shoots you instead of him. That's the idea. It's a stupid idea. I'm open to better ones." She didn't have one. She just looked at him a long beat with those blue eyes. And Declan suddenly couldn't quite remember what he'd been about to say. "Catalina, I'm the bait. Bait don't get to plan that far ahead." Something flickered behind her eyes, just for a second. Something that wasn't anger. Then it was gone. "Don't get killed, Brannigan," she said. "I haven't decided yet whether I want to do it myself." He rode out of the sinkhole, slumped in the saddle, the way an old man slumps after a long morning. A mile out, the trail dropped down into the willow-choked bottom of Coyote Creek. The water was running fast and shallow. The banks were soft sand. It was the perfect place for an ambush. Declan kept his eyes moving, slow like an old man's eyes, but he wasn't looking at the water. He was looking at the gap in the brush on the far bank, at the place where, if he was a killer, he would have set up his rest. Sunlight winked on something metal. Declan threw himself sideways out of the saddle. The rifle cracked. The bullet slapped through the air where his head had been. Declan hit the creek shoulder first, going down hard into the cold water, and rolled until the bank covered him. A second shot. A third. Lead chewed splinters off a willow trunk inches from his face. He came up with his Winchester in his hands. A man stood up in the willows across the creek. A second man beside him. A third farther back holding the horses. None of them had bothered to hide, because none of them had expected the old man to live past the first shot. Declan put the front sight on the chest of the lead gunman and fired. The man went down without a sound. The second one had time to swing his rifle around. Declan worked the lever and shot him through the throat before he could pull trigger. The third man was already running for the horses. He vaulted into his saddle. Declan put a bullet through the saddle skirt, close enough to scare the horse half to death. It reared and dumped him. The man came up with his pistol out. Declan shot him in the gun arm. For a long minute there was nothing but the sound of the creek and the man's whimpering. Declan waded across. He kicked the pistol farther away. "Who paid you?" The man spat blood. "Go to hell." Declan crouched and laid the cold muzzle of the Winchester against the man's good knee. "I will start with this leg. Then the other. Who paid you?" The man broke. "Calder," he gasped. "Rafe Calder. He's the one running the rustlin'. He wanted the old man dead because his land sits right where they push the beef. And you, he wanted you dead too. Said this morning was supposed to set you up so nobody'd cry about it." Declan stood up slowly. So there it was. He came back into the sinkhole an hour before sunset, with a prisoner tied to his saddle and 2 dead men slung across the horses of the men they used to be. Catalina came out of the cabin at a run. She stopped, 10 feet from him, Breathing hard, he saw her face, saw what was in it. She had been waiting, and while she'd waited, she had been imagining how this was going to go, and it had not been going well. "You're hit." He looked down. There was a long red graze across his ribs. He hadn't even felt it. "It's nothing. It's bleeding through your shirt, Brannigan." "It's his shirt." She made a small sound, almost a laugh, almost something else. And then she was on him, her hands on his face, his shoulders, his ribs, checking him over with the same fierce attention she'd brought to pointing a rifle at his heart. "Cat," he said quietly. She stopped, realized what she was doing. Stepped back so fast you would have thought he'd burned her. "Inside, Brannigan." She bandaged the graze at the kitchen table while old Crockett kept the prisoner covered with the sharps. Her hands were not quite steady. Declan, sitting bare-chested under the lamplight with this raven-haired girl bent close over his ribs, was finding it very hard to think about Rafe Calder. "You should have let me come," she said quietly. "They'd have shot you first." "Maybe. Maybe not. I'm a better shot than you are. Catalina, you are a better shot than anybody. And I've known you less than a day." She glanced up, just a flicker, those blue eyes. "My grandfather," she said, "was Don Esteban Ortega. He owned all of this valley once. Chialito, he named it. Little Heaven. Then there was a range war and a fire and bad men, and he lost everything. My mother married a Vance and died young. My father died right after. My grandfather has been hiding up in this hollow ever since, drinking himself to sleep, because he can't bear to look down at the valley that used to be his." She tied off the bandage. "So when 4 ranchers send a stranger riding up to fetch him, you can maybe understand why I came out of that door with a rifle." "Mom," Declan said softly, "I'd have shot me too." She laughed then. A small, surprised laugh. Old Crockett from across the room said, "Children." They both looked at him. "You can sort out whatever this is later. Right now we got a problem. That man tied up out there is going to be missed. And when he's missed, Rafe Calder is going to come for us before the night is out." Declan reached for his shirt. "Then we don't wait for him. We ride down to the valley tonight. We rouse Holbrook and Tatum and Whitaker. We put it in front of them. The prisoner, the bodies, the whole story. Calder won't be able to talk his way out of 3 corpses and a confession." Catalina was already reaching for her coat. "You're going to be grateful for a lot of things before this night is over, Brannigan." It was full dark when they came down into Cielito Valley. Declan led them to Silas Holbrook's place. The old man came out on the porch in his nightshirt with a lantern and a shotgun, and when he saw the bodies, his weathered old face went slack. "Sweet Jesus, Brannigan, what in the—" "Silas, I need you to send for Tatum and Whitaker. Not Calder. Will you do that?" The old man's eyes went very narrow. "Why not Calder?" "Because Rafe Calder is the man who's been selling us out, and this gentleman tied to my saddle is going to tell you so." Silas looked at the prisoner. The prisoner looked at the ground. The old man set the lantern down. "Ride in, son. I'll send for the others." It took less than an hour for Boone Tatum and Mose Whitaker to come pounding up the lane. Less than 10 minutes after that for the prisoner to talk. He had no fight left in him. He told them everything. When he was done, Boone Tatum took off his hat very slowly and ran a big hand over his face. "I rode in your yard this morning, Brannigan. I called you a thief in my own head. I owe you an apology. You owe me a horse, but I'll take the apology too." "And Calder?" Whitaker asked. "What do we do about Calder?" "We ride," Silas Holbrook said, "right now before he hears." All of us," said Catalina Ortega Vance. They all looked at her. She had not taken off her coat. The sharps was still in her hand. Her blue eyes were the coldest, steadiest things in that room. My grandfather has been treated like a dog by this valley for 20 years. And tonight a man tried to put him in the ground for a piece of dirt nobody else wanted. I am riding with you, and if any of you tries to leave me behind, I will shoot him in the foot." There was a small, stunned silence. Then old Silas Holbrook smiled, the first real smile Declan had seen on his face since the morning. "Miss Vance." It would be an honor. They rode up on the Diamond Sea an hour before dawn. Rafe Calder must have heard the hoofbeats. He came out onto his porch in his shirt sleeves, with a lantern and a Colt revolver, and his hawk's face was perfectly composed until he saw who was at the head of the column. Then it broke, just for a heartbeat. "Just long enough, Silas. What in the world brings you?" "Drop the gun, Rafe." "Now, Silas, I don't know what." "Drop the gun." He didn't drop it. He raised it. He raised it toward Declan, because Declan was the one he most wanted dead, even now. Declan saw the muzzle come up. He reached for his own iron, and he was fast. But he was tired, and he was hurt, and he was not going to be fast enough. The sharps roared from his left. Rafe Calder spun half around with the lantern still in one hand, and his Colt dropping from the other. He took 2 stumbling steps, sat down hard on his own porch step, and slid sideways into the dust of his own yard. He did not get up. Catalina lowered the rifle. Her face was very pale, but her hands were steady. "I told you," she said quietly. "I'm a better shot than you." The sun came up over Cielito Valley a few hours later, gold and slow. Declan was sitting on the top rail of Silas Holbrook's corral, watching the light come. His ribs hurt. His face hurt. His hands, when he held them out in front of him, were not entirely steady. He heard her come up behind him. He didn't turn around. Catalina climbed up onto the rail next to him without a word. She had washed her face. No rifle in her hands now. The sleeves of her shirt were rolled up to the elbows, and her dark hair was tied back loose at her neck. They sat in silence a while, watching the sun. "Brannigan," she said finally. "Catalina, my grandfather is going to ask you something this afternoon. He's going to ask you if you'd be willing to help him work the sinkhole. He says he's too old to do it alone, he says." She paused. "He says you're a good man, and good men are scarce up here." Declan turned his head and looked at her. She was looking out across the valley, and the new sun was warm on her face. And Declan thought he had never in his life seen anything he wanted to keep so badly. "And what do you say, Cat?" She was quiet a long time. "I say my grandfather is right." Declan reached over slowly and took her hand. She did not pull it away. "Catalina Ortega Vance, 12 hours ago you pointed a rifle at my heart. I remember. You said you were going to kill me. I remember that too. What changed your mind?" She turned her face to him then. The blue of her eyes in the morning light was something he would carry with him for the rest of his days. "You did," she said. And, in the wide gold light of Cielito Valley, the little heaven that an old Spanish Don had named for his granddaughter long before she was born, the lonely Irish rancher who had ridden in as a stranger 6 months ago, who had been branded a thief by his neighbors and marked for death by a man he'd thought was his friend, leaned across the top rail of a corral and kissed the half-Spanish girl who had tried to kill him twice. She kissed him back. And somewhere up the slope, on the cabin step of a hollow called the Sinkhole, an old man with a white beard sat in the new sun and smiled to himself like a man who has just watched a long, dark winter finally break.